But these, they're going to be what we'll talk about today, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Hypothalamus is the master regulator, right, working in conjunction with the brainstem, right, of the ANS, right? And when we say ANS, this is very important to get down right here, right? Visceral, motor, visceral and motor, two important words here, right? Because the ANS doesn't refer to sensory, the sensory component traditionally, right? And we're not going to do it, right? Some books kind of add in visceral sensory, but simplest way to think about it is what you call visceral motor, right? And what does visceral mean? It means smooth muscle. It means cardiac muscle, your heart. It means all the glands of your body, right? It means also adipocyte, because it's going to kind of stimulate the metabolism of adipocytes. So we'll kind of cover some of these and see what we mean by that, but that's what visceral refers to. And we're going to contrast this with what? Versus somatic. And in terms of motor, that will mean skeletal muscles. Okay, so versus. And so as we go along, before we get into them in particular, you'll notice, we'll see these words sympathetic and parasympathetic, and these are the two anatomically and functionally distinct divisions. So, a lot of, when you're trying to organize, think of the way the brain is organized and everything, you look at different books and they organize it differently. And some of it is arbitrary, like how they classify one thing. But this is pretty clearly, and these two divisions here are going to be very clearly, have very different anatomical kind of organization, and their effect on their organs is going to be almost the opposite. So this is one of those things that are very kind of true, right? Even, if you just looked at it, this is what you'd be observing. These are two very different sort of pathways, but they both belong to this autonomic nervous system because they're both about visceral motor control. Right, autonomic nervous system. All right, so again, let's contrast, compare and contrast. I always hated those words, but what they mean is, what are the similarities between something? What is the difference? Why is it as important? Because for you to understand, and think about it in this way, because when you're answering multiple choice questions, or you're trying to answer anything, right? I have something I want you to know, right? Which are somatic motor effectors? And you'll have a list. How about head muscles? How about neck muscles? How about limb muscles? How about heart muscle? How about cardiac muscle, right? You want to I have to put in distractor questions. And if I'm asking you about somatic, my distractors are going to be visceral. So it's important to understand, in any case, to differentiate between these two. So for the somatic, when I say somatic, you should automatically think motor. At least when I say somatic motor. What I say, when I think somatic motor, you want to think, skeletal. And this is command. So we're talking about motor. We're not talking about sensory right here. We're talking about somatic sensory. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Motor, command. That's what command means. Skeletal, right? And all that was controlled in that pre-central gyrus. Remember that? Your motor homunculus. So if you wanted to move your thumb, right? There was neurons in that pre-central cortex on the front of your brain right here that were voluntarily moving your thumb, right? Because they sent the motor down and they came out here and they stimulated the motor unit that was making these contract and making you move your thumb. You could do this at will, right? Right now, if you just choose for whatever reason to stand up, it's because, all these muscles became activated and you stood up, right? That was voluntary. Okay, somatic, command, motor, skeletal, muscles. Okay, always kind of put that in. Voluntary, skeletal, somatic, connect all those words together, put them in a box. Somatic, voluntary, skeletal. How about precentral gyrus of cerebral cortex? How about motor homunculus, right? All those should be like clumped in your mind together, such that if you want to look for those kind of buzzwords, even if you forget any details, maybe these will help you answer, at least eliminate some multiple choice type things, right? You always want to approach tests like that. Think of how I could ask a question and think of what distractors I could ask. But it's also good just for understanding what we're talking about here. This is what we've been talking about throughout the entire brain. Okay. Okay. I also want to mention here, and this is nothing I'm really trying to test you on or anything, so it's kind of like you could consider this a red kind of dot, but subconscious programs that allow you to do learned behavior, right? Stuff you've done, but you don't have to think about, right? You ride a bike, maybe you play a piano or an instrument, maybe you surf or whatever. All those can be done without really thinking about it once you're good at it. But they can be, all these muscles that do that can be voluntarily controlled. And that was the whole point of that. And it's just a point that, some people get maybe tripped up over. But it is about voluntary control. You still want to keep these under that same batch, right? And reflexes, same thing, right? Even though you're not doing it voluntarily, when your knee kicks out, right? That was because of a contraction of your rectus femoris, right? And a relaxation of the biceps femoris, right? But you can do that voluntarily too, right? So even this reflex here, its target cell was your skeletal muscle. It was all done without thinking about. But there's other things. These autonomic reflexes, they act the same way, right? A stimulus, receptor, a sensory neuron bringing the information in. And it goes through this reflex arc. There's going to be a little difference here. And the main one, what we're interested right now, is the target cell, right? Because in this case, it's going to be skeletal muscle. And we can, if we want to, control that voluntarily. In this case, it's going to be these things: smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, right? Fat cells, whatever. This is going to be the target cell. Okay? And the response will be something different. It'll also be not anything you can do willfully, right? This is going to be happening without your consent, basically, without your input, at least your conscious mind, rather. All right. Heart rate, you can't directly control your heart rate. You can't control how fast your food digests. You can't actually, of course, you can control urination when you pee and defecation and stuff, but that'll be through actually these skeletal muscle sphincters that are going to be on top of your visceral smooth muscle sphincters. Right? But all the reflexes themselves are controlled through these autonomic reflexes. All right, so again, let's really nail this down, because there's going to be a good 5-6 questions that are going to, be directly or indirectly, and really more than that, really. So you really want to understand the difference between visceral and somatic, and what I mean when I'm talking about viscera. Right? And some things are easy, right? It just, the organs themselves are everything inside your body, right? Your lungs, your heart, your blood vessels, your stomach, your liver, your pancreas, all your intestines, right? Your spleen, all that stuff, kidneys, all that is your viscera. And when I say smooth muscle, this is probably the least intuitive, but you're going to have to understand this at some point. Layers of smooth muscle within these tubes all over your body, right? You have your gut tube going through your body, right? Food is going through this hole right here. Blood is going through your blood vessels, the lumen, and all these organs, and this might be your respiratory tract too, the airways, right? Something like that. All these organs have these different layers of tissue. One of those layers, at least one of those layers, is going to be a smooth muscle layer. You'll learn this as the tunica media when you get to blood vessels. You'll learn this as your muscularis externa muscle, smooth muscle, right? And these are muscles in your blood vessels which can constrict and cause vasoconstriction. That is, decrease the amount of blood flow, maybe increase the pressure, like putting your finger on like a garden hose, right? And making it squirt higher but less through it. Or these muscle layers are going to cause movement through the digestive tract, right? You know, or movement through your ureters, right? Or movement through your reproductive ducts. All these muscular layers are going to cause that movement through tubes or kind of control the movement of tubes by this layer of smooth muscle around there. So this is what's innervated by your autonomic nervous system, right? As far as this smooth muscle. So that's what I mean when I say smooth muscle. And there's a couple other more particular examples, but going into Bio 145, this is what you're going to learn about, okay? And then there'll be, of course, the glands, which I'll mention in a second. Everybody kind of understand what I'm talking about here, about visceral motor command. This is why the smooth muscle part of this, when I say control over smooth muscle, that's why it's important, because your tubes in your body and all that is going to be made up with these layers of smooth muscle along with all the other stuff. All right, so here's another example, right? Your skin, right? Smooth muscle, blood vessels. So when I talk about that, the smooth muscle might be actually a direct strip of smooth muscle, which these erecti pillae muscles, which make your hair stand up over there. Those will be innervated by autonomic fibers. The smooth muscles in your blood vessels that are around here, which, as I mentioned, can control the flow of blood toward here for temperature regulation, and the innervation to your glands over here, making you secrete more sweat right over here. So this is a good example of a bunch of variety of stuff that this visceral motor control is going to control right here, right? This is opposed to what we might have mentioned when we talked about the skin, those different types of sensory nerve fibers that were doing the afferent or somatic sort of afferent things that made you feel things like touch and pain and stuff like that on your skin. These are visceral motor components. Now here's another one about glands, right? Innervation of glands in your body. Remember when we talked about the pancreas? Anybody? Way back in the endocrine system, I mentioned, and this is something you should remember. I'll put this as part of the review for the cumulative, right? But your pancreas had all those blood vessels in it, and it could detect levels of glucose. And so if the glucose levels are too high, it secreted insulin. If it was too low, it secreted glucagon, right? Insulin promoted the storage of glucose. Glucagon promoted the breakdown of glycogen and stuff to create more glucose in the blood because you needed it for whatever reason because of low blood glucose. But so that was done by the endocrine cells that just sense levels of blood glucose, right? Those alpha and beta cells of your insulin, of your pancreas. Despite this blood levels of glucose, your autonomic nervous system sends nerves down into here and could stimulate these insulin producing cells or glucagon producing cells, independent of what your blood glucose levels might be, or maybe in part due to it, right? So you could also, if you need more energy, right, you want to increase the level of glucose in your blood, you might start stimulating them to secrete more glucagon, or vice versa, insulin. Right, so you could do that through those cells that actually sense the blood glucose, or for as far as input via your hypothalamus and your autonomic nervous system. Glandular, right? Making that secrete more insulin or glucagon. All right, that's just another example. All right, so the control of all that, right? Whether it's smooth muscles around the lining, glands like that, and your heart is the most obvious one, right? Your cardiac muscle, which is just there in the heart, as well as fat metabolism and fat storage and stuff like that, is going to be one of those, all those things that are regulated by your visceral motor system, right? And your command center of that is your hypothalamus, right? So these two words, autonomic nervous system and visceral motor, are synonymous, right? When we're talking about the hypothalamus, control over the autonomic nervous system, we're talking about the control over the visceral effectors, smooth muscle, glands, cardiac muscle, adipocytes. So we'll look at the autonomic nervous system and its control over the organs and systems composed of these visceral tissues. And talk a little bit about these because these have specific examples of these visceral effectors, right, that are controlled by your 3, 7, 9, 10, right? I hope I didn't just block out there, but just say that over and over and this will be an easy way when you ask for a question, when I ask for something, which one of these nerves only have a somatic component? And you'll say, let me eliminate these guys right here, right? Or if I say, which ones have a visceral, right? So just kind of, you put that, and it's to make like a no brain kind of thing, which can allows you to at least answer, maybe help you answer some questions. But these are oculomotor, 3, your facial nerve, your glossopharyngeal, and your vagus, right? Are those ones with the visceral component, 3, 7, 9, 10. All right, so let's look at this oculomotor. First off, remember the oculomotor neuron I said was controlling the skeletal muscles of your eye, right? Along with your trochlear and your abducens. Those are making the eyeball go up, down, sideways, all that, right? So your oculomotor neuron came out of the brainstem, and its nerves came out and stimulated your skeletal muscles to voluntarily move your eyeball, right? That was one of its functions, extraocular eye muscles. However, your oculomotor neuron, cranial nerve number 3, also innervates the constriction of your pupils, right? So your pupils have these layers of smooth muscle around here, an internal one and outer one, these radial muscles over here, which when you stimulate them, they constrict, right? And your eyes, your pupils get smaller, right? This happens automatically. You can't control it. And when somebody shines a light in your eye, your pupils just automatically contract because it wants to kind of shut down the amount of light, which can kind of damage it and, make it harder to see eventually, right? So by contracting these muscles, right, you're decreasing the amount of light. Again, you can't do it voluntarily. In dim light, you have another set of nerves, not the oculomotor neuron, but there's this other layer out here, which when stimulated will kind of widen the pupil, right? Here, right? But both of these are around the eyeball right there, and they're smooth muscle controlled involuntarily. So that's the other function of your oculomotor neuron. That's why it's one of those visceral nerves, right? Your oculomotor neuron also controls the lens over here, automatic focusing, right? If you're trying to look at something and you move it closer to your eyes, automatically adjust to focus, right? That's controlled by the lens, by these so-called ciliary muscles. Don't worry about it. This is just an example, right? The focusing of the lens is going to be done by smooth muscle. Again, you can't do that voluntarily. Otherwise, we wouldn't need glasses, right? But in any case, that is, I don't know if that's the point, but in any case, those are going to be another smooth muscle control, and that's done by cranial nerve number 3. Those other ones, 2 other ones, the facial nerve and the glossopharyngeal, 7 and 9, are controlling your salivary glands, right? Among doing other things. Their visceral component is controlling, secretions of your salivary glands. Basically, when you're hungry, right, your mouth starts watering because you're thinking of food, and this gets it ready to digest the food. It makes your mouth water. There's enzymes in here which are going to help you digest carbohydrates and fats, right? And so those start stimulating when you're hungry, when these nerves are active, right? You salivate, basically. And again, think of like you smell something, or you're just internally, your blood glucose level is low. and you just start to feel hungry, and that's just an automatic response. You can't do that voluntarily. Right? Vice versa, there'll be other nerves doing the opposite thing, drying up those salivary glands, making your mouth all dry, right? But these glands, right, extraglandular secretion by the facial and glossopharyngeal nerves because these salivary glands. Makes sense? Oh, your facial nerve also does lacrimal, right? The tears, making you, make sure your eye is moist. All right, so all these visceral effectors, right? Smooth muscles around your eyes, your tear glands, cardiac stuff is obvious. We didn't talk about adipocytes, but they're another target. But those are some examples where you'd find these glandular cells. Right? So that would be cranial nerve number 3, cranial nerve number 7 and 10, 9, sorry, right over here. And these are doing pretty specific kind of local type of stuff. They're not really too broad-based. So 3, 7, 9, and what's the last one? Exactly, 10, your vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is the big one, right? This drops down into your thoracic cavity. It innervates the heart. It innervates the bronchial tubes, the bronchioles of your lungs. It innervates like the glandular type cells in your liver and stomach, right? And there's smooth muscle making motility increase. So it's controlling all this stuff down over here, right? Your vagus nerve, right? And that vagus nerve is controlled by your hypothalamus and your reticular formation, your brainstem stuff. This is cranial nerve number 10. So this cranial nerve number 10, dropping down over here, is your major nerve for your so-called parasympathetic innervation of all these organs. So when we talk about these two divisions, the parasympathetic one, mostly we're going to be talking about this vagus nerve right here. So that'll bring us into our next topic, the autonomic nervous system, which consists of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic divisions. All right, we'll see you next time.